So let me go to Berlin, and one of the things we have here, and I think these are really quite interesting, is that we have, almost every city has a lot of historical maps. Berlin happens to have 34 historical maps. These maps have been geo-referenced as best as possible, and there's some interesting questions connected to geo-referencing which should be addressed, namely the fact that not every map is, as you well know, I mean, planimetrically accurate. Not every map is geo-referenceable. We have plenty of maps in Rome that basically just have the Colosseum and then they have dragons all around the side. It's like, well, where do the dragons go, right? I mean, so it's an interesting question about how a worldview is represented in a map. What's wonderful about these maps, though, is that some of them are 30 feet long. Many of them have, particularly the ones in LA, are these beautiful USGS maps made in the 1920s and 30s. They're huge. And you have the kind of level of granularity and detail that allows you to go down to, essentially a block level with and to change the opacity to kind of see, okay, this was the name of the street. It was, Heiliger Geist is the Holy Spirit street. And you can kind of go back and forth. Right? I mean, we have the ability to change, when it's working, the opacity slider, and you can essentially compare, so to speak, street names. You can look at the satellite imagery from today, and you can also view the maps in Earth mode, which allows you kind of an interesting way of zooming over the maps and adding buildings or other material on top. So this all, I think, becomes really useful when you're talking about the many layers that coexist, or you're talking about the kind of transformation of the city space. All those things can be tested. You can test hypotheses by looking at the history of the representational practices. I don't see Google by any means as the answer here. I see Google as part of a lineage of representational practices, just like any one of these maps from the 17th, 18th, 19th, or 20th century. There's a whole history connected to map making, which I'm happy to talk about. It's a little bit outside of this presentation, but it's a significant and important history that I don't want to gloss over. What I do want to show you is a student project, though, about this location here. Let's see if I can keep it on. Sometimes 3D mode does really weird things, so it's band intensive. As you probably know if you've used Google Earth before. Let's see. I think it'll load. Yeah, looks like it will. So I mentioned that it's been used in educational practices. This was a final project. All my students created final projects in HyperCities. The whole class was actually run in HyperCities. Well, all the objects for the class were in HyperCities, and all the lectures had HyperCities on. But the class wasn't it wasn't a web-based class. I was physically there with the students. But this was essentially their textbook. So all their material, the readings, and their projects were within the HyperCities environment. And this also meant that other students could see each other's work. So they worked in teams. This particular student worked on the history of the Royal Castle. I'm showing you the Royal Castle in 1772 map, and then as you turn the project on, you see different chapters that they created. This is the Royal Castle here, and then it has a series of information, arguments, basically about its connection to German national identity and so forth. And they produced a couple of three-dimensional models, which possibly will load here on top of that 1772 map. Let me see. So there's the 1772 map, and I think in a second you'll get their model will load when it just feels like loading. And what's interesting is that they kind of are doing a number of things. They're taking existing material that's out there. They're using Google's SketchUp program. They're using a 3D warehouse, and I don't know why it's not there. And here we're watching it on 1772. And let's see, that comes on.
So what are the little tags?
These are part of their, oh, there's their model right there. It came. Little tags are connected to the chapters in their argument. So you could either open them up here, or you can, over here is the same information. So as you mouse over it, it just tells you what's there, and then it'll recenter the map based on the particular spot that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. I decided to load it on 1772. I don't know if they did. They didn't necessarily want that, but I can mix and match. As a user, I can mix and match any base map and then put any kind of data layer on top. This is part of the openness of the project. There's a kind of curated way to go through the project, but there's also kind of an open-ended aspect. And that open-ended aspect allows me to, well, I want to work these two projects together. Or I'm going to watch this project on this map. I'm going to look at it in 3D or 2D. I'm going to take objects from this project, if they're open, and export them into my own project. All those things are possible. In fact, this whole project, individual files as well as the whole file, can be exported as a KML, and as such, you can view it in really any geo browser like Google Earth, or you can put it in your own project. All the content in here is licensed under a Creative Commons license that we ask, basically one of the 6 Creative Commons licenses that content producers agree to. And so that's, mostly it's an attribution license, which means just say who authored the stuff. So that's...
And don't sell it.
And don't sell it, yeah. That's another restriction you can place, yeah. So let me end by showing you this last project of Ghost Metropolis. And I'm going to go to Berlin, hopefully. And hello, why are you stuck? There we go. Oh, actually, I go to Los Angeles. And I mentioned that one of the things that we've been thinking a little bit about, or a lot about lately, is particularly integrating not just historic maps, but also user-created maps, and particularly maps created by researchers in the field. This particular overlay, you have to zoom out a lot to see it, shows the Mexican-Spanish rancho land grants that were given out between 1784 and 1846, given out, I mean, that were made, that began to carve up the region of Southern California. And it's really interesting that that particular map, you know, you could mix and match and overlay it with another map which is not even coming from our data, but the redlining project that Richard Marciano and David Goldberg down at UC HRI, Irvine, and UNC are working on, which is the history of redlining that was the home security loans, which basically gave a priority to whether the land was valuable or not, and basically played a huge role in the racial composition of many US cities. So you can mix and match all these maps and material, and it's pretty interesting to kind of see, this is the redlining project, and that data is coming from other servers. HyperCities is more of like kind of connective tissue. Rather than us putting everything in a big bin, we bring together many different data feeds from other servers. So I'll just leave those 2 maps on, but I go to a collection list, and again, I can open the public collections of the classes. There's one featured collection, which I'll show you, which is this Ghost Metropolis. And this is a project that Etherington has been working on, so it zooms out a lot because the project is actually quite global in scale. But it's a project that he's been working on, which is Los Angeles from 13,000 before the present up until today. And he goes through these, what he calls regimes that have been living in the area, the Los Angeles basin. And I'll zoom in a little bit to this map because it's actually a lot more useful if you're zoomed in a bit. This is the map that I was mentioning, which is this huge 30 by 30 map, which is actually here at Santa Barbara. And then I kept the Mexican land grants map on, and then these are the chapters in his collection, starting from the Clovis conquest and going up through the military-industrial complex in the latter part of the 20th century. Each time, I mean, in order to see this, you need to open up, so to speak, you keep the map and the arguments on the side here. You open up one of these chapters, and then within the chapter, there's a lot of material that one could navigate. That material varies from photographic material, text-based stuff, whatever, yeah, and so forth. So what you have here is part of his argument, and I don't know exactly what the connection here. I think it's one of the iconology that he's been interested in. And anyways, what you would begin to do is kind of see the relationship between the maps, the historical information, the narrative, and so forth, and trying to think, okay, what would this multimedia argument really look like? How would one instantiate a kind of place-based narrative? And this is a project that Etherington has been thinking about and working on for a while, and trying out and kind of pressing some of the things within the HyperCities environment. And so I've been really interested in kind of supporting this sort of a project. Yeah, I think I've talked a lot already, so let me stop. And I'm sure that if there's questions, I probably can talk a little bit more about, give some other examples of things that we've been thinking about. But let me stop there and